And we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Now, Heathrow Airport is one of the busiest and largest airports in the world. Each year they handle around 84 million passengers. It's something like 130,000 flights or even more. It's a huge, huge number of flights. And of course, many of you will already know there was an enormous fire there. Although when you actually look into the story properly, it wasn't enormous and the fire wasn't at Heathrow Airport. It was at a power substation a couple of miles away, or 2.5 kilometers away. So 3 days ago, this was all over the news. It was huge news and every single media outlet was talking about it. You couldn't open a paper, you couldn't turn on the TV, you couldn't open social media without seeing about this story. And then about just under 2 days ago, the whole thing just disappeared. It vanished. And now there's nothing on it at all. And you know me, I love these stories because I always say, that's a little bit suspicious. What is going on here? So I wanted to wait until all of this had blown over to start looking into it. And now I have looked into it, and there's a lot of weird things that just don't add up. So if you're a logical, rational thinker like me, then I'm sure you're going to enjoy what we've got to talk about today. So here it was a fire broke out in Heathrow's airport substation. Flights got cancelled. It was 1,300 flights got cancelled, and the whole airport ground to a halt. They couldn't do anything. People were sleeping in the airport just all over the place and nothing could happen. So what actually happened, it was March 20th, a transformer fire knocked out a substation. Just one substation, that was it. And instantly, Heathrow said, we can't operate because this substation's been knocked out and that's it, we've got to close everything down. Now, the first thing I noticed about that was that the National Grid CEO, this was John Pettigrew, I think his name is John Pettigrew, he said this anyway, and I'm going to quote him because I wrote it down. Heathrow had enough power from remaining substations despite one being shut down. So when they asked him further, he said, I don't know, it's a mystery, you'll need to ask Heathrow. So what should have happened then? This is quite interesting. I was speaking to one of these electrical engineers today. Great insight. In fact, I should have had him on for an interview. That would have been even better. I don't know why I didn't think of that. But anyway, here's his notes. This is what should have happened. Backup diesel generators. Yeah, backup diesel generators, we'll come to this later, should have kicked in as a redundancy. Multiple power feeds from different substations. He said there was different substations available, battery banks, UPS systems, automated switch gear that flips instantly when one line goes down. And we're going to come back to this in a moment because, actually no, I'm going to carry on a little bit, but then I want to show you some of the news articles here because I think you're going to be very fascinated. And no, even though the New York Post, within an hour of the fire, came out with what it was, they knew instantly it was Russia. Yep, Russia had done it. Russia had caused the fire, and then they'd closed down all of Heathrow. I mean, the New York Post, you've got to love their journalism. They are just ahead of the game. Despite being on the other side of the world, they knew instantly who did it. That's tongue-in-cheek, by the way, if you don't know my humor by now. So there was enough fire, there was enough power, everything was fine. The generators should have kicked in. There was all this redundancy available. Everything was fine. What could have gone wrong? Let's put this down for a moment then. What could have gone wrong? And if you haven't seen it, by the way, this was the fire. I mean, it was pretty big, but it was only one substation. So it's not as if, you know, it was anything too crazy. It was one substation. Here was the New York Post, by the way, if you like a good laugh. They knew straight away it was Russia, but there you go. So even the Telegraph, which, you know, the Telegraph, they said that it had enough power to avoid the shutdown. So even they were saying it. And then there was a lot of other claims. Oh, Farage had a good one. And I looked into this. We'll talk about that in a moment. And he said I started reading into it, and I've got an update today as well. And there's still no clear explanation for why Heathrow completely closed, which came after the fire knocked everything out. So there's still, no one still knows what the reason for this was. Well, you know me, I love to do research. So one thing I thought straight away, especially when I heard about the diesel generator, was I went straight over to Heathrow's website and I looked up if they had a sustainability report, what they're working to for 2030. So this is what I found. There was one, and this was their strategy. Now it's from 2020 through to 2030. So they do have a sustainability strategy, and I had to read through the whole thing where I found some quite interesting things. So they have their net zero aviation. Oh, I shouldn't have said the word net zero. You're going to get a warning under this video now about climate. But here's what it says. Cut up to 15% of carbon in the air by 2030. Cut at least 45% of carbon on the ground by 2030. So then I had to open up their big plan here, which really came about in 2022 when they first put this together. And they have all sorts of things. It's a huge plan, so we're not going to go through it all, but they have section 8, if you want to actually read this, is all to do with net zero goals on the ground. So I started reading through this, and could this be the cause, biofuel? No. Could it be government policy? No, not really. Buildings and infrastructure, though, when we go on to this aspect, could this be anything to do with it? Possibly. It says the biggest source of carbon that we directly control is the gas we burn to heat Heathrow's building. So their proposed solution is based on electrification of space and hot water heating. Okay, so this was one thing I saw, and I said, would that be the reason? Probably not. They are reducing their electricity usage down and relying on more renewables, as you can see here. So they're relying very heavily on renewables. Now, I've got a slight theory which we'll talk about in a moment, but they said that let's get a bit closer on this. So solar power, they wanted to rely more heavily on solar power. So they've installed solar power on the Terminal 2 roof, and they want to get most of their electricity to be self-contained. Now, we talked about this a while ago, and we'll come back to the report in a moment, and I'll get you a little bit closer to this. And what did we say? By the way, feel free to subscribe to the channel if you're not already. So what did we actually talk about then a while back? We looked at those reports that said, can a large-scale infrastructure like government-related or an airport, can it run or rely solely on renewables? And the answer was categorically no, it cannot, especially when it comes to redundancies and backup power. And this is the same with most kind of renewables. You either need that battery storage, or you need, which is more likely, some sort of a fossil fuel based energy power center that is running a power plant that's running idling in the background, right? Because turning it off, turning it on, etc., uses huge amounts of energy. So we know this stuff. It's kind of fairly basic here. So let's continue on then. They wanted to bring it all into electricals, and they proposed a £23 million to design network upgrades and heat solution and begin to implement these. Okay, so this is it. Is this still the reason? I would say probably not. Then we get to the new solutions, and it doesn't say whether these have been implemented or not. So for those of you at home, if you want to go and do this research, please do it and tag me on X, or just put it under this video. You can look into this in a lot more detail. So this is what I found then after going through the whole report. It says standby power generation. Well, this is exactly what we have just talked about. And it says standby generators currently, and this was, remember, 2020, operate using diesel as they need an independent power source to maintain resilient operations. They are used predominantly as backup power for airfield ground lighting. We are investigating renewable-based alternatives that can still meet the stringent performance criteria for such critical a safety asset. So this is what they said then. And again, I'm not saying that they have gotten rid of their diesel generators. I'm not saying that. Other people are saying that, but I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is this is very, very suspicious, especially when I went into a little more detail on all of this. The bottom line is, even though everyone's saying it's a mystery, it's actually not a mystery. It just, there's obviously, and I've broken it down to maybe 2 or 3 things I think has happened, but this shouldn't have happened in the first place, obviously. So what could have gone wrong then? A, switchgear or power management system failure. What could that be from? Infrastructure overloaded or configured based on a blend, here we go, of renewables and what they call fossil fuels. So could that be a diesel generator? It says, if the remaining substations couldn't handle the full load of the airport due to poor load balancing or cabling limits, Heathrow may have chosen to shut down parts of the airport. Okay, so that's another option here. They could have just chosen to shut it down because these substations couldn't handle it. But that's not what we're hearing from National Grid. They're saying actually the substations, we have the evidence, could handle it. So we're going to cross that one out. It doesn't really add up to that. Poor system integration with renewables is another option. That is looking fairly likely. The failure C of backup generators. This one is also very likely. And again, speaking to a couple of people, they say they can't understand why these diesel backup generators didn't work or why they couldn't carry the load. But again, they said that they're not designed to, a diesel generator isn't designed to power an entire airport. Like, this thing is enormous. You've got to think how big an airport is. There's restaurants in there, there's cafes, they're using a lot of equipment. You've got all the lighting, all the electrical, you've got, I mean, there's a lot going on in an airport. It's a huge drain of power. So these generators wouldn't have been able to do everything anyway, but they could have kept the important systems online, your air traffic control, radar, and all the other basic stuff. Would they have kept the ovens going in the restaurants? No, but most probably not. I mean, whether they're on electricity or gas or whatever. But this is where we start getting into a lot of questions here. And some of the most likely things then are, was it a deliberate system shutdown? And if it was, why? Why would Heathrow Airport do that? Why would they deliberately shut down and cancel all those flights? It would have cost them a fortune in lost business. So another thing that doesn't add, well, we covered what doesn't add up then. National Grid says there was enough power. Heathrow said that the transformer failure made operations impossible. So what was it then? Well, we come down to 2 or 3 things. It was the internal infrastructure failure, could have been the load balancing. It was the backup systems failed. So these 2 things are kind of linked. Or it was simply a management decision to shut down the airport for whatever reason. And that's the thing that I find very unusual. And please drop a comment below if you have any thoughts on that. But they're the 2 options when we come down to it. It's not really this mystery that the media and government are saying, oh, we're going to need a 3 or 4 month investigation into this. Not, why do you need 3 or 4 months to investigate something that seems fairly straightforward? It was either management closed it down or the infrastructure failed. And if it failed, National Grid said theirs was fine, so it's something at Heathrow. So either way, it was at Heathrow. Either their equipment failed, their infrastructure failed, or the management closed it down. That's it. There is no complexity or 4 month investigation needed here. It's one of those 2 options. Now, there was one other thing I wanted to talk on. Actually, do you know what? I think let's wrap it up there. That's good enough for today. I think that gives us plenty of food for thought there. So thank you so much for being online and subscribing here. Take care, God bless, and I'll see you next time.